The Council dismissed Earth, then humanity returned with a fleet. The tactical matrix on the flagship died without a single electronic warning. High Arbiter Vexarin reached for his command console, but his heavy silicate display logged 0 incoming hulls. Yet the gravity gauges beneath his boots read a massive, sudden localized displacement of weight across the entire system perimeter. The heavy black silicate of his armor screeched against the metal frame of his command chair as he leaned forward to check the main subspace tracking array. No warning. No declaration, no escape. A wall of raw kinetic density had materialized out of the dark. The screens remained blank, but the physical vibration running through the deck plates proved something huge was sitting directly behind his vanguard. Vexarin turned his quad mandibles toward the primary communications deck, but the long-range subspace link had already flatlined into a dead 4 Hz hum. The high seats believed the ledger was closed. They were wrong. Stay close. 30 cycles earlier, the wet ink on the parchment of the 14th Amendment had settled with the absolute finality of a death sentence. The Galactic Council had governed the local cluster for thousands of cycles, presiding over 46 sovereign species across thousands of star systems. Inside the grand amphitheater of the Conquered, the air smelled heavily of ozone, sharp cooling chemicals, and ancient damp stone. High Arbiter Vexarin stood at the center of the hammered bronze dais, his skin textured like oxidized bronze as he looked down at the empty human delegation desk with cold certainty. The demographic records are clear, Vexarin announced, his voice carrying through the thousands of curved seats. Subject species 407, known as humanity, has failed to meet the required industrial threshold. Their world is fractured, their output is negligible, and their protectorate status is hereby dissolved. The Sol system is opened for immediate resource annexation. The vote passed without a single major delay. To the Council, the blue planet on the rim was a minor accounting error being cleared from the stellar ledger. The entire assembly turned its back on the system, completely unaware that a civilization could choose to stop speaking simply because they were busy doing something else. In the observation gallery, Fleet Commander Kaylees of the minor Realoi Enclave watched the central display flick from blue to a sharp, dismissive red. Kaylees stepped down to the lower tier of the diplomatic platform, his fragile skeletal structure shifting beneath his robes as he intercepted Vexarin's military staff. "You are misreading the silence of the outer rim," Kaylees said, his iridescent eyes locking onto the Arbiter's primary mandibles. "For 30 cycles, Earth has sent no complaints, no trade envoys, and no appeals for structural aid. A dying species begs for resources. An empire preparing for a conflict turns off its radio signatures." Vexarin did not pause his stride. He signaled his security detail to clear the corridor, brushing past the elder observer without adjusting his armor. "They are farmers without a single capital warship," Vexarin replied, his voice flat with administrative contempt. "They will comply with the automated eviction order, or they will become part of the soil." 3 days later, inside a temporary command module anchored to an isolated asteroid on the absolute edge of the Sol boundary, Admiral Clara Vance sat at a small steel table. She turned a notched iron tally rod between her calloused fingers, her face unmoving as the Council's automated eviction transmission arrived on her terminal. The plain service tunic she wore smelled faintly of machine oil and filter coffee, a sharp contrast to the pristine silks of the Conquered halls. The transmission gave humanity exactly 72 hours to surrender all orbital infrastructure. Captain Marcus Vance checked his cracked mechanical watch, the click of the gear spring loud in the small module. "They didn't even send an organic courier," Marcus noted quietly, setting the watch back into his pocket. "They used a standard low-frequency automated signal to clear out an entire species." Admiral Vance did not write an appeal. She did not shout. She simply stood up, smoothing the front of her worn coat as she looked at the 12-meter tactical grid behind her terminal. The iron tally rod in her hand bore 24 deep grooves, each one marking a completed assembly cycle in the dark space of the outer rim. "Acknowledge the signal, Officer Lin," Vance said softly, her voice devoid of anger. "Send no text, just return a standard automated compliance code, then tell the deep foundries to stop venting heat." The Council's arrogance was anchored entirely to a single document. Their intelligence logs detailed a fractured planet with 0 capital warships, but they had failed to notice that the planet had stopped building its infrastructure where the stars could see. Under the massive shadow of the Uit cloud, protected by the planet-sized mass shadows of the outer gas giants, the Iron Genesis Charter had been running for 24 consecutive cycles. Humanity had not rebuilt its cities. It had converted the dense iron cores of dead moons into heavy deep space fleet carriers. When the Vorkai Dominion's annexation fleet, consisting of 165 Vanguard warships, dropped out of hyperspace near Mars. They found nothing. The orbital elevators were gone. The research stations were dark, shielded by heavy kinetic curtains that absorbed all thermal output. High Arbiter Vexarin stood on the bridge of the flagship, his primary sensors searching the empty space for any sign of a defensive garrison. "The system is clear," the primary tactical officer reported, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "The subject population has retreated to the surface." 14 light minutes away, inside the dark command module, Surveillance Officer Lin tracked the precise entry vectors of the invasion force. Every alien cruiser registered as a sharp red signature on his screen, their tracking arrays scanning the empty orbits of the inner worlds. "The Vanguard has deployed across the perimeter," Admiral Lin reported, his hands locking the target coordinates into the central relay. 165 signatures total. Admiral Vance set her coffee cup down on the metal table. She did not double-check the telemetry. She did not call for a staff meeting. She simply pressed her calloused thumb against the primary activation switch on her console. "Activate the Sovereign Network," Vance commanded quietly. "Bring the fleet home." Across the dark spaces between the outer worlds, fake asteroid signatures began to peel away from the tracking grid. The automated heatsinks inside the hollowed-out hulls of the Uit cloud refineries went completely silent as the heavy industrial doors opened. They did not have 45 cruisers. They had built 400 heavy fleet carriers, each one 2 kilometers long, constructed from the raw metal of dead moons that had never appeared on a council map. On the flagship bridge, Vexarin's console suddenly flared with unquantifiable mass metrics. The gravity gauges groaned as the local spacetime grid warped under the sudden manifestation of 400 capital-grade hulls dropping from localized microwarp vectors. The sphere was perfect, an absolute geometric encasement that cut off every hyperspace exit trajectory simultaneously. They dropped, they anchored, they waited. The ratio of hulls was staggering, but the weight of metal was completely beyond their military doctrine. The tactical screens on the Vanguard ships flickered wildly, then died completely as the human carriers brought their dark matter mass inversion arrays online. High Arbiter Vexarin stood completely still on his bridge, the screeching of his silicate armor the only sound in the room as his bronze skin turned a pale, sickly ash color. No flashing lights, no aggressive broadsides. No demands for structural terms. The human fleet simply moved with the terrifying, silent precision of a machine that had been turned on after 30 cycles of manual labor. Vexarin keyed the emergency subspace channel, his hand shaking slightly against the cold bronze of the rail. "Identify your authority," he broadcasted into the blind frequency, his voice cracking through the static. "You are in direct violation of a signed council decree." The reply did not come from a diplomatic envoy or a legal representative. The frequency carried only the steady, unhurried voice of Admiral Vance, her words echoing through the flagship's dying bridge systems. "We did not draft an appeal," Vance's voice stated, the transmission clear despite the localized jamming. "We built a forge." Back in the grand amphitheater of the Concord, Fleet Commander Kayles looked up at the main telemetry terminal as the final data packet arrived from the Sol border. The screen did not show a battle. It showed a total cessation of all Vorkai tracking signals, a clean erasure of 165 warship signatures from the active sector map. The high seats stayed completely silent, the representatives of 46 species staring at the empty human delegation desk with a new, suffocating weight. The council had spent thousands of cycles measuring power by the lines drawn on a parchment map. They had completely forgotten that some species do not claim worlds simply because they are tracking something larger. The final text string appeared on the central display, broadcasted directly into the core relay of the station world. Admiral Vance sat back down at her steel table in the dark module, picking up her notched iron tally rod as the long-range monitors went black. She did not watch the screens fade. She did not join the crew's silent nod. She simply ran her thumb over the 24th groove, knowing the forge was already heating for the next cycle. On the dead bridge of the flagship, Vexarin looked out through the visual viewport as the massive silhouettes of the Mooncore carriers turned away into the dark space grid, leaving his unarrested Vanguard floating in the silence of an empty system. The green coordinate box on the central council screen flashed once, displaying the final line of the human transmission. "We didn't leave because you broke us. We left because you were small." The coordinate box flickered out. The central screen went dark. A single glowing icon remained on the black glass, flashing the image of a hand-notched iron rod.